The Little Mermaid. Far away and deep in the sea, there lived a sea king with his 6 daughters in a palace of coral and amber and pearl. They were all looked after by their grandmother, a mermaid who wore 12 oysters on her tail because she was the king's mother. The youngest mermaid was the prettiest. Her eyes were as blue as the sea, and her skin as delicate and fair as a rose petal. Just like all the other mermaids, she had a human body that ended in a fish's tail instead of human legs and feet. The daughters of the Sea King played in their father's palace, where the walls grew flowers and the amber windows opened into the deep sea. Fish would swim through these windows just as birds can fly in through the windows of human houses. But these fish swam up to the mermaid princesses and ate from their hands and allowed themselves to be stroked. All the princesses had gardens under the sea where they made their flower beds in the shape of whales and mermaids. But the littlest mermaid made hers in the shape of the sun, and she chose to have only those flowers that shone like the sun. The littlest mermaid was different from her 5 sisters, quieter and more thoughtful. They ornamented their gardens with the strangest items that they had discovered in the wrecked ships, but she put nothing in her sun garden except a single marble statue. The statue was made of fine white marble and shaped like a beautiful boy, and it had sunk to the bottom of the sea with a sinking ship. Next to the boy, she planted a red rose weeping willow that grew well and spread its branches all over his head. The princesses were not allowed to go up to the top of the sea until their 15th birthday, and then, one by one, year after year, they went up and came home again to tell of the wonders they had seen. One of them saw the moonlight on the calm sea, and one of them saw the sunset and swans flying overhead. And the bravest princess swam up a river and saw children at play, and was scared by a dog in the water. At last, it was the turn of the littlest mermaid. On her 15th birthday, her grandmother made her wear 8 oysters on her tail because she was a princess. "You must suffer to be fashionable," she said when the little mermaid complained that the oysters hurt her tail. Up she went to see the world above the water. It was just after sunset, and she could see a sailing ship close by where a prince was celebrating his birthday too, only he was a year older than the Little Mermaid. She could see his big black eyes and his handsome face whenever the waves lifted her up, but when the fireworks began, she was afraid and hid under the water. Then a storm began to blow. This time it was not the Little Mermaid, but the sailors who were frightened, and with good reason, for the wind blew and the waves tossed the ship until it was wrecked, and the men all jumped into the water to save themselves. She could see the prince sinking into the sea, and at first she was glad he was coming to live in her palace, but then she remembered that men could not live under water, and that he must be lifted up or he will die. She dove down among the wreckage that might well have crushed her, and took hold of the young prince and lifted up his head so that he could breathe. All night long she held his head above the water, and at sunrise she could see the land, but the prince's eyes were shut, and he did not feel the little mermaid kissing his face. She took him towards the land, and there she could see the tall blue mountains with white snow on their crests. To the little mermaid, the snow looked like the white swans lying there. Closer to the shore was a green wood, and a building with a garden of orange and lemon trees and tall palm trees in front of its gates. The sea had shaped a small bay here, with a narrow beach of pure white sand under a cliff, and the water in the bay was calm and smooth and very deep. The little mermaid swam up and then hid in the water and waited. A young girl came down to the shore and found the prince just as he was waking, and he smiled at her. But the little mermaid was sad, for the prince had not smiled at her. and he did not know that she was the one who had rescued him from drowning. Then she swam home sadly, and every morning and every evening she went back to the place where she had taken the prince, but he was never there. Her sisters kept asking her what was troubling her, and at last she told them. "Come, dear little sister," they said. "We know where the prince lives, far away from here, and we will take you to look at his palace." It was a palace of marble and gold, with the marble steps down to the sea. Now that the princess knew where the prince lived, she went there again and again to see him and to listen to the people talking about him and saying how good he was to them. The little mermaid longed to live on the land like people. She asked her grandmother what it would be like to be a human and not a mermaid. "Do humans live forever if they do not drown?" she said. "No," said her grandmother. "They die like us, but we live for 300 years, and their lives are shorter. But when we die, we turn to foam of the sea, for we have no souls. Human beings have immortal souls that live on forever in heaven." "But why do we have no souls?" she asked the little mermaid sadly. "I would give my 300 years for the day of a human life and a soul." "Better to live as your sisters do, and be happy here. The only way to have a soul is to share a human being's soul. So someone were to love you and marry you, but that is impossible. They do not think our tails are beautiful, and they can only love people who have those clumsy legs instead." The little mermaid looked at her tail and wished for human legs. That night, a ball was held, more splendid than any ball ever held by humans on the land. The walls were of a great ballroom with crystal. There were hundreds of mussel shells that served as lamps, glowing red and green, sending out jets of bright blue flame until the hall was full of light, and so was the sea outside, for the crystal walls let the light through. There were too many fishes to count, fish of all sizes and shapes, golden, silvery, their scales gleaming in the light, all swimming by the walls. A stream flowed through the centre of the ballroom, wide and rippling, and just as the stream made its water music and it danced along, the mermaids and mermen all made their own music as they danced. Their voices were more beautiful than any voices heard on the land or in the sky. The little mermaid sang more sweetly than anyone else, and when they clapped their hands for her singing, her heart sank with joy too, for she knew that she had the most beautiful voice of all in the sea, in the air, or on the land. But then she began to think sadly of the world above her. She could not forget the handsome prince, and she remembered her longing to have an immortal soul like his. She stole out of her father's palace and went to visit the sea witch to help. The witch lived at the bottom of the whirlpool in the sea, in the middle of a sea forest of sneaky creatures, half plant and half hungry animal, that took hold and would not let go of everything that went past. But the little mermaid tied back her hair and swam past the sneaky things and the bones of all they had caught and killed. The sea witch was waiting for her. "You are a fool, little mermaid," she said, "to want legs instead of a tail, hope to make the prince fall in love with you and give you half his soul. Still, I will help you. I will make a drink for you, and you must swim to the land and drink it there before the sun rises, and your pretty tail will turn your legs as you drink. People will think that you are beautiful, and you will walk and dance more beautifully than anyone. But each time your feet touch the ground, it will be like treading on a knife." "I am willing to suffer the pain of the sharp knives to win a soul," said the princess. "But the spell comes at a price," said the sea witch. "You can never come home again, and if the prince does not love you and marry you, you will not win an immortal soul. The day after he marries someone else, you will die from a broken heart and turn to foam on the sea." "I am willing to take the risk," said the princess. "But the spell has another price," said the sea witch. "You have the most beautiful voice of all the sea people. I want it for myself. You must let me cut out your tongue. Only then will I make up the potion for you to drink." "But if I give you my voice," answered the princess, "how will the prince come to love me?" "You will have your beauty to win him by. Put your tongue out. It is only a little price to pay, and I will give you the potion." So the little mermaid bravely put out her tongue. The sea witch cut it off and gave her a drink that shone in its bottle like a star. The little mermaid swam back through the forest of the sneaky creatures easily, for they were afraid of the star drink, and she swam through the whirlpool and back to her father's palace. How sad she was, for she could not speak to them to say goodbye, and she knew that she was leaving them forever. She swam to the shore where the prince's marble steps came to the sea, and there she drank the potion. It hurt her throat like a sword cutting her, and she fainted and lay on the steps until daylight. Then the prince found her lying there, wrapped only in her hair, and asked who she was and where she had come from, but she could not speak to tell him. He took her into the palace and dressed her in fine clothes, and she danced for him on her new feet more beautifully than any human being could ever dance. Every step she took, the pain was like treading on a knife, but she walked so beautifully that no one could tell. The prince told her that she must stay with him always to be his companion, for he loved her. He loved her like a child, but he had no thought of marrying her, and one day he told her he was in love with a beautiful girl from a faraway land, who had saved him from drowning from the dark sea when he had almost drowned on the night of his 16th birthday. The little mermaid longed to tell him that she was the one who had saved him, and not the girl who had found him on the seashore. She could say nothing, however, for she had given her voice to the sea witch. The king and queen wanted their son to marry, and were sending him to a faraway country to meet a princess. The prince told the little mermaid that he would never marry this princess that he did not know or love, for his heart was given to the girl who had rescued him from the sea. "If I marry, it will be to you," he said to the little mermaid, and he kissed her. Next day they set sail for the faraway country, and the prince asked the little mermaid if she was afraid. She laughed to think of the storms she had swum in, and then she was sad when she looked deep into the water and saw her father's palace and her grandmother and sisters looking sadly up at her. At last the ship arrived at the palace where the princess was waiting. As soon as the prince saw her, he said, "You are the beautiful girl who saved me when I nearly drowned. I have always loved you, and it is my dearest wish to marry you." Then he turned to the little mermaid and said, "You will stay happy and be with us." But the little mermaid felt her heart breaking, so that she would surely die in the morning and turn to foam on the sea. In the evening, the prince and his bride sailed on the sea, and the little mermaid went with them. There was a feast and a dance to celebrate the marriage, and the little mermaid danced more beautifully than ever. At every step she felt the pain of sharp knives cutting her feet, but the pain in her heart was worse. Late into the night they feasted and danced, but at last the prince and his bride and all the sailors were ready to rest. Only the little mermaid stayed awake and watched the sea until it was almost dawn, when she would turn to foam on the sea as she died. Then she saw her 5 sisters come up from the depths of the sea, and their flowing hair was all gone. They had sold it to the sea witch so that she would make a spell to rescue the Little Mermaid. The witch gave us a knife so that you might kill the prince before sunrise. When his blood runs over your feet, they will become a tail again, and you will live with us 300 years in the sea. You must be quick, sister." The Little Mermaid went to bed, where the prince was and his bride were sleeping. She looked at the prince, and then she threw the knife into the sea, just as the sun was rising, and threw herself in it. She could feel herself turning to the foam of the sea. In the sunlight above the sea, she could see hundreds of spirits rising in the air and singing. She felt herself rising up out of the foam to join them. "Who are you?" she said, and now she had a voice again as beautiful as theirs. "We are the daughters of air," they told her. "Like the sea people, we have no souls, but we can create a soul for ourselves by doing good. After 300 years, if we have tried our best to do good, we win an immortal soul and go to heaven. Little Mermaid, you have tried to do good. You have endured pain for the sake of love, and so you have won a place with us." The prince and his bride looked sadly down into the sea foam for the Little Mermaid's body. She kissed the bride and smiled at the prince, but they could not see her or feel her kiss. Then she flew up with the daughters of the air into the sky to do good deeds and win an immortal soul. "Perhaps it will be less than 300 years, the daughters of the air said to her. "Whenever we find a child who is of good loving, a year is taken from the 300. But whenever we find a wicked child and weep, and for every tear we must wait out another